All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Data. I'm one of the co-founders of Denver Startup Week. Thank you so much for joining us for our next session here at Denver Startup Week, headquartered powered by Amazon. And of course, none of this would be possible without the great sponsorship that we have from our partners at Amazon, and also our title sponsors at Capital One, Downtown Denver Partnership, Denver Business Journal, and Dell for Startups. You know, this week is all about the community and what the community can do together. And obviously, Denver's just part of an even larger community when you look at what's happening across Colorado and across the Rocky Mountain region. And a lot of the reason that we all live where we do is because of some of these great towns and places that are in the beautiful spots of the mountains. But what does it take to build a business there? And so excited for this really nice panel with some great entrepreneurs who are doing some incredible things there, moderated by one of our friends from Holland & Hart, Amos. Amos, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Zooming from the Trailhead. Can you really run a startup from a mountain town? We live in a virtual world, and the question often comes up, can you really run a business from anywhere? We've got three Rocky Mountain West entrepreneurs with us today to help answer that question. We'll be talking about challenges, advantages, reasons for doing what they do, and access to capital, sourcing workforce, various other issues that come up. My name's Amos Barclay. I am a venture capital, emerging growth, and M&A attorney with Holland & Hart. Seated immediately to my left, we have Todd Hanna. Todd is the COO of Vertical Harvest Farms in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Going down the line, we have Georgia Grace Edwards, the CEO and co-founder of Nara Apparel, based in Gunnison, Colorado. And then on the end, we have JB Leach, the COO and co-founder of Aspect Avi, based in Evergreen and Crested Butte. All right, good morning, everybody. I thought we'd kick off just by asking you all to say a few words about your company, what you do, and why you do it, where you do it.
You want me to go first, in order?
Sure.
As Amos said, my name is Todd Hanna. I'm the COO of a company called Vertical Harvest, which was founded and is still headquartered in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which is a little bit of an anomaly. You don't usually think of scalable farming companies coming out of a mountain town. So Vertical Harvest, we're on a mission to build local, large-scale urban vertical farms in cities around the country. We have one under construction in Portland, Maine, looking to do Detroit next. Our headquarters is in Jackson Hole. And in addition to growing vertical farms, we have a unique business model that is committed to and mission-driven to employ at least 50%, or to make sure that at least 50% of our employee base that we provide well-paying, upward mobile jobs for people with disabilities. So it's a combination, we like to say, of growing food and futures.
My company is Nara. We are on a mission to help everyone answer nature's call quite literally, and we do that through a patented zipper technology. So there's a second fly that begins at the base of a normal zipper you'd use to get your pants on and off, and it extends all the way to the back of the pant, so the user can control the size and location of the space they need to create. The idea came from a summer I spent working as a glacier guide in Alaska, and I started it from my college dorm room 5 years ago and have been full-time with the company for 2 years now. And we have 4 full-time employees, several contractors. The majority of our sales are direct-to-consumer online, but we're also in several retailers across the US and New Zealand. And now we're working on licensing deals to put our patented technology into other brands' products. So multi-channel business.
I'm JB Leach. I'm the COO and co-founder of Aspect Avi, and our mission is to make it possible for everyone to enjoy the backcountry safely and eliminate avalanche fatalities as a result of backcountry skiing. We are launching this November, and we have a split workforce, my partner being Crested Butte, me being here in the Evergreen area on the Front Range. We are a pretty small and scrappy team right now, and yeah, I forgot what I was going to say.
I'm sure we'll all get around to the probing questions here in a moment. Thanks, everybody. So most startups need outside capital to grow. In places like major urban centers, coasts, Increasingly here in the Front Range, there are established capital networks of investors, angel networks, VC funds, and what I think my first question on my mind is, what does that look like in a mountain town? What is the access to capital, particularly sophisticated capital, and how have you found the experience of fundraising for your business in your respective mountain towns?
I started the company from a small mountain town in Vermont, Middlebury, and then we are headquartered in Gunnison. I came there 2 years ago for the Moose Jaw Mountaineering Outdoor Industry Accelerator Program, which is run from Western Colorado University campus out of a co-working space. And following that, we won a purchase order from Moose Jaw Mountaineering, and they paid for half of it up front, which is unheard of in apparel. And then did another accelerator program. That one was out of Boston, and we were one of 3 companies to win out of over 200 to win $100,000 cash. And so that was my real jumping off point in going full time. But I think small towns have been really important to the early stages of our company because you're so ingrained in a community, particularly via an accelerator program that provides a lot of funding and resources. So our first, that purchase order that came from the accelerator was the first capital we really had. And then we also won Western Slope Startup Week, which was our first access to debt, which has also been really useful being an inventory-based business right now. And then, yeah, those have been the main, I'd say, sources of funding. Also, VCs who are focused on deploying capital not to the coasts, we've been able to access. So a diverse mix of everything, but it definitely feels harder, I think, than when you're in a city and a lot more people are walking around ready to write checks.
Yeah, just to echo what Georgia Grace is saying, I mean, I live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, right? If you Google it, it's, I don't know, top 3 maybe wealthiest zip codes in the United States, which is, I mean, there's a whole set of problems that comes with that. And I think what Georgia Grace is describing, at least in Jackson, Wyoming, is, I think starting out, depending on what the business is, what we call friends and family, in a small town, there's a lot of friends. Like everybody knows each other, right? And so I think raising money in those early stages, whatever you want to call it, pre-seed or seed or et cetera, is very doable. I think there's a misnomer, I'll use Jackson because that's where I live as an example, that because it's wealthy, capital's easy to find, right? And I can tell you that's there's a lot of rich people, but they're not all looking to invest in a mountain town company. And I think there's confusion. I'm originally from Austin, Texas. That's an ecosystem it's like Denver, right? That's an ecosystem of raising money, scaling companies, and that ecosystem doesn't necessarily translate, right? I have friends that have houses in Jackson, and they have absolutely no interest in investing in a scalable company in Jackson because they have plenty of deal flow where they know the landscape better. So I would just say early stage, yeah, Mountain Town is a great place because, like I said, there's a lot of friends and family. As you go up, it becomes more difficult than you think to raise those larger rounds. Like we're in a Series B right now for us of trying to raise about $30 million, and very few, if any, will come from Jackson.
Yeah, it's been interesting for us as well, and I would echo what Todd is saying about friends and family. That's where all of our funding has come from to date. With me being on the Front Range, we've tried to do the fundraising here in Denver, and that's been extremely difficult because we're pre-revenue. So, there's not a lot of individuals or VCs that want to invest in a pre-revenue mobile app, and one that kind of carries the risk profile that we are. We hear a lot, your users are high risk, and some people don't want to touch it. Conversely, though, Jeff being in a ski town, in his network, there's a lot of people that are really passionate about it, and in Crested Butte in particular, there's a number of people that have been impacted by people that have died in an avalanche. So it's kind of near and dear, and that has helped us get to where we are now. But it's not easy either. It's been a year and a half worth of conversations to get that first check, to kind of get things moving. And it's starting to snowball a little bit now, but it's been a very long process to get to where we're at.
Todd, it's interesting when you mention about how wealth doesn't always translate to a sophistication of investor or somebody that really is interested in being in for the long haul with a startup in a high growth company. I'd be interested to hear more from you all about, from my standpoint, on the one hand, you can always take investment capital, but do you always, and depending on your inflection point at the life cycle of your company, you may not only want money at each stage. And so I'd be interested to hear more about and Georgia Grace, you mentioned the Moose Jaw Accelerator, but other opportunities for mentorship beyond just money, and the sort of interplay of a capital investor who is also potentially a board member or also potentially a trusted advisor during those initial growth years. If you all could talk a little bit more about mentorship and availability of those kinds of resources.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in and then you guys can go. I'm glad you asked the question because I was trying to think how to say this. I think with every good, there's a yin and a yang, right? So what I said I think is totally true. And there are a lot of people in mountain towns who have done really amazing things other places. And so whether it's mentoring, knowledge, board seats, I actually think that's an advantage. I don't know if it's an advantage, but it's a true benefit of a mountain town. Again, it's a small community. People want one another to succeed. And I think that's a valid point that comes with, even if they don't invest financially, they want to see their neighbor succeed. And I think I certainly have examples. I mean, I work for Vertical Harvest right now. I can tell you right now, nobody crushed it in vertical farming and moved to Jackson, Wyoming. Right? But there's a lot of people who have spent a lot of time in CPG. I worked for some other CPG companies in mountain towns. There's a lot of people that have done a lot of CPG, a lot of technology, a lot of real estate, a lot of construction. So there's a ton of knowledge in these towns. And I think as an entrepreneur, being willing to be vulnerable and go out and ask for help, not just financial help, but hey, can you help me navigate this problem or think about my trajectory? I actually think that is a real benefit to a small community, whether it's in a mountain or not.
Yeah, to add to that, I think industry matters too. And so for our company being rooted in the outdoor industry, there's a lot of people in mountain towns who are familiar with everything that goes into that and can provide a lot of mentorship and support. Our biggest sources of those kinds of resources have always come from accelerator programs and co-working spaces. I've worked out of a lot of spaces in a lot of mountain towns. And I think, again, for early stage companies, it feels a lot harder to slip through the cracks when you're ingrained in a community like that, versus I've also run this company from an apartment in Boston, and I was a really, really small fish in a really, really huge pond. And then I also meant to add that the other sources of funding that I think rural communities do well come from the SBDC. So we were actually recruited to move our headquarters to Gunnison following the Moose Jaw Accelerator by the city of Gunnison in the state of Colorado for economic development. So there are a lot of great sources like that we would not have access to were we in a city at this stage.
Seems like it would also help for your branding too. I mean, particularly for outdoor apparel, it looks better to be based somewhere like Gunnison or Crested Butte versus, the Jersey Meadowlands or something like that.
Yeah, we think of cities as places where the trends emerge, and that's definitely true. But in the outdoor industry, I think if you're not in a rural place, you won't have as strong a pulse on what's actually going on, how people are actually using your products, et cetera.
We've actually really benefited from just the diversity of people within Crested Butte and, who our investors ended up being because they're passionate skiers. Jeff's had or has, strong relationships with these individuals, and I'm a product designer. Jeff's a mountain guide. Neither of us know the first thing about running a business. And we've been really lucky. One of our investors and board members, he's started up and sold multiple businesses, and he's done a lot to help us with forecasting and financial planning and financial models and things like that, and keeping an eye on our burn rate, and is doing a good job of keeping us in line. But we, I don't know where we would be without a lot of the help and the input from those individuals. So it's been really good. And I have a ton of contacts in Denver, but it's been difficult to access some of that network and get some of that mentorship that I think we need, where in a smaller town, those relationships are a little bit stronger and people are more willing to help out and get involved.
That's great. So one question on my mind is thinking about these places that I love to go, the Crested Buttes, the Tellurides, the Jackson Holes of the world. They're hard to get to. And sometimes things run on time. Sometimes things, might take a little longer. So question on my mind has to do with infrastructure. Everything from reliable internet to snow removal. If you all could talk a little bit more about the challenges posed by perhaps not ideal infrastructure issues for running the kind of business you want to run.
Okay, this topic is near and dear to me. So, snow removal in Crested Butte is awesome. Internet is not awesome. Yeah, it's Jeff and I frequently quip that the hamster wheels running Crested Butte internet are taking a break. Yeah, it's difficult, and it's not something that you would normally think of. I've been a remote worker for 5 years now, just in my day-to-day job, and have benefited from really good internet at my house because of my proximity to Denver. That is not a reality for a lot of these more rural places, and it does impact your ability to get stuff done, because Jeff can't download stuff, can't upload stuff. We get on a Zoom call, and you catch every third or fourth word, and it's a struggle, and it can be maddening. I think we're at the point now where we're going to get him Starlink to try and fix this problem, because Crested Butte's not fixing it. And in the wintertime, when the town is overrun with tourists, it's pretty much internet is non-existent. It just doesn't work.
What does the Starlink arrangement look like? In terms of getting that set up, kind of reliable, ready to go, is that like a week-long process? Is that a day?
It's going online, paying Elon a bunch of money, and him shipping us a satellite dish.
Nice.
My former roommate runs a campground in the Crested Butte Valley, and he also uses Starlink for actually booking reservations and stuff. Yeah, the infrastructure or lack thereof is definitely frustrating. I think I've tested 5 different mailing addresses to know which one I'll get samples to the fastest, so I can turn it around to the factory the fastest. And my house I have 0 service at my house, so it's all Wi-Fi, but luckily mine's better. Ice Lab is the co-working space I work out of, and they have the highest speed Wi-Fi in the valley, so that works super well for us. I don't think we could be headquartered there without it. But despite being frustrating, I think those things are also reasons why we chose to be headquartered there, to have better access to the outdoors. We're trying to make the space more accessible, and it's hard to do that if you're not actually there. And the ability to have a better work-life balance, I don't know that I've achieved that, but I at least have access to it with trails literally right outside my door, instead of running along the Charles River in Boston being like, yeah, I run an outdoor company. So those are, pros and cons.
And Georgia Grace, Ice Lab is a partnership with Western, is that right?
Yep, Western Colorado University, yeah.
Yeah, from an infrastructure standpoint, as someone who thinks a lot about operations, there's certainly the technology infrastructure, which honestly, Jackson luckily doesn't have the same problems that you guys are describing from an internet standpoint. But the other types of infrastructure that are part of the reason we moved there, to Georgia Grace's point, but I think just as an entrepreneur, you got to be willing to find the solution. So, there's technology, but there's infrastructure around, I know this sounds really basic, but roads, right? If you don't have the ability to work remote because of technology, I mean, we have passes closed. I mean, Jackson is essentially an island, right? 98% of the county is federal land. So, passes close, roads close, post office closes, even infrastructure around like HR infrastructure. So like benefits, there's a lot of like health benefits. There's a lot of companies that don't offer them in places where we live. So there's infrastructure technology, then there's infrastructure with, if you're running a company like Georgia Grace is, where you have to ship stuff, it's pretty hard to do from a mountain town, right? So you have to think about third-party, I don't know if you guys use them, but third-party logistics and things like that.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, there is technology, there's an infrastructure of people, there's an infrastructure of distribution, for lack of a better term, depending on it. I will say this, it's all solvable. You just have to kind of put on your entrepreneurial hat and be willing to do things a little differently than, again, we would have in Austin, Texas, where everything is right there, or Denver, where everything is right there. But I think it's solvable and doable, and there are benefits that come with the struggle.
I don't think I've ever been able to send anything to a physical address in Jackson Hole. It's all P.O. boxes between the Elk Refuge and the National Park, and so it's kind of a throwback, I feel like, in that way. I feel like the scene at the local P.O. box or the local post office has got to be pretty fun, or frustrating, depending on what kind of a day you're having.
I mean, all kidding aside, the Jackson Hole post office is now only open a few days a week because they can't get enough help to work there. So in addition to only having P.O. boxes, you can't even go all the time.
Yeah, it's the same problem in Crested Butte. And when I have to send Jeff stuff, I send it to the ice lab because we also work out of there. But Jeff's in Crested Butte, and that's 35-minute drive or more for him, depending on the day and the situation. So it's not easy. But yeah, there are other workarounds.
Nice. So dovetailing to another topic somewhat like infrastructure, but I wanted to ask about sourcing workforce in these sort of vaunted mountain towns. And do you feel like you have reliable sources of workforce? And what are the challenges posed by, say, getting a lot of work done on a powder day, for example?
I guess I'll go first. I think workforce, like that, I would say that's the hardest thing about scaling a company in a mountain town. Not because there's not smart people. If this is being filmed, I don't want anybody that I work with to hear me saying there's not talent. But it's, at least Jackson is a really hard place to live, and it's very transient, right? So I think the struggle is not that there aren't wonderful, great people and talent, depending on the industry. It's that, number one, again, I can only speak about Teton County, it's super expensive to live there, and you can't pay the wages that someone needs in order to be able to be there. So I think that's the real struggle with talent, is essentially it comes down to housing where we live. Also, a lot of people move to, again, Jackson or a mountain town as a young person with every intent to go ski for a season or play golf for a season or fish or whatever, knowing that they're going to move. And so the longevity is another piece. So thinking about infrastructure that, hey, if you do have talent that is in person and you want to keep them, how do you do that? And then as far as kind of the attitude of a mountain town, I mean, if you go to Jackson and say, where's the guy in the white shirt? Like, I'm the only guy in Jackson that owns a starched white shirt. I can tell you that right now, right? Because there is kind of that's one of the reasons we move there, is to do the things that there are to do. And it's also one of the most annoying things about, and I'm saying mountain towns, maybe it's small towns in general, is response time or sense of urgency is very secondary to a POW day. And that's not always feasible when you're trying to do with these guys and what we're trying to do on stage. And that's, I think that's a real struggle. I mean, I skied 2 days last year. And so that I don't know if you guys have.
In all fairness, he does have a knee injury. So.
Yeah.
I think I skied like 50, but I pulled all-nighters.
More like it.
Yeah, I think two things come to mind. One is that a lot of rural communities, particularly mountain towns, have housing crises going on right now. So for us, even having full-time employees who are interested in moving to the area, they can't because their partner or spouse can't find a job there or find housing there. So that's been a struggle. And then on the flip side of that, I think people in mountain towns, or at least in Gunnison and Crested Butte, are super used to working like 6 jobs at a time. Everyone pieces together all of these odd jobs. And so I think that mindset of like hustling and having a lot of grit and figuring out how to make things work and being creative, that skill set is something that I think is unique to areas like ours. And so we've had, I'd say, more success finding contractors who can't work a full week but can do certain types of work for us than full-time employees. We've never had more than 50% of our employees all in the same place. We have some on the Front Range as well and across the US and internationally. So we've always kind of been a hybrid mix.
Yeah, it's kind of a different animal for us because being technology-based, there really isn't any talent to speak of in Crested Butte that we could leverage for that. There was, a couple of people we tried that just didn't have the skill set quite at the level that we needed it. So our engineering team is distributed, across the state. Fort Collins, Denver, Colorado Springs, because we've had to source outside of those areas to get people that had the skill set to get stuff done. To Todd's point about like professional services, it's pretty tough in the mountain town. Our business in particular, we have a lot of pressure right now to deliver. Investors want this product out, and sometimes it's just hard to get stuff done when we need to get it done within the community. So, we kind of always try and partner with people in the Crested Butte area, but it just doesn't always work out. I think fortunately our PR agency, Treeline PR, she's based in Gunnison County or Crested Butte, and that's great. Like, she's really connected to Jeff and the community and what we're doing. But we haven't been able to do that with everything that we need to run the business.
And then is it looking towards the Front Range for things like CPAs, lawyers, financial advisors, insurance providers?
Yeah, lawyers, obviously.
Yeah, that I know.
So the CPA stuff, we actually have somebody in Crested Butte, but all he does is bookkeeping. So now we're having to find somebody to do the tax stuff, and it's kind of this piecemeal arrangement to everything. Insurance has been a whole different beast. That is, we have people on the West Coast, on the East Coast, in the Midwest working on this problem for us. But Jeff originally had reached out to his broker there in town to try and get our liability insurance for our product, and they wouldn't touch it. So there are these elements of the business where you do need bigger companies that are more likely to be located in bigger city centers to get some of the stuff off the ground.
Yeah, I would think so, especially as things scale and grow. It's one thing to sort of be a small town. I mean, speaking only as a legal practitioner, it's one thing to sort of be a small town lawyer, help folks form companies, basic structuring, things like that. As the scaling continues, you find fewer and fewer service providers that are familiar with the intricacies of sort of like a complex transaction, be it a venture capital raise or a bridge round or a company sale, things like that. All right. Seem to be going very quickly through our topics here. But I wanted to ask a little bit more about community engagement in your respective communities. How are startups perceived? Is it a welcome sort of embrace from the local community? Are there old or new economic or other tensions around locals and non-locals, things like that?
I think for us it's been a mix, to be quite candid. I think the differentiation between local small business and export-oriented startup is bigger than a lot of people think. We do a lot of events locally and always donate product to local initiatives. Turnout in terms of volume is obviously always much smaller, but the the quality of the customers who show up at that event is someone who's already our target audience, which is really nice. But if I need to get rid of like thousands of sample pairs of pants, I'm definitely doing that at a trade show in a city or at a pop-up event at a bar in Denver, as opposed to in my local community, just because of the numbers.
Thousands of pairs of pants.
We rebranded in April of this year, so we went from SheFly to Nara, so I had SheFly units I had to get rid of.
Talk a little bit more about that moment.
Sure. So let's see. There were a few reasons for the rebrand. The first was this licensing revenue stream. We knew from early conversations that a lot of the applications of our technology, the brands who were interested in implementing it, were not wanting to do it only in their women's line. So some wanted to put it in a unisex product. Some wanted to put it in their men's line only because they sell more of their men's line, for example. So if you think about like men's fishing waders featuring SheFly technology, that didn't really make a ton of sense. So that was part of it. The other part of it was a social reason. A lot of people in this industry see NARA as leaders in inclusivity and accessibility in the outdoor industry. And so we have a lot of people in our community, a lot of customers, a lot of people on our team who don't use the she pronoun. And so there was no reason to be intentionally limiting for no reason when there doesn't need to be a pronoun in the name. So Nara comes from the Latin root word naris, which means to get to know or to become familiar with. So we took this problem that at least 50% of the population is very familiar with and solved it. And then we still wanted to have nods to the outdoor industry, shred the nar or gnarly, but still sounding feminine. So that's how we got Nara, featuring GoFly technology.
And was there a physical process involved in the actual, well, you mentioned getting rid of thousands of pants, but was there a replacement of labels kind of a thing? Was it sort of like a just one-off, like seeing which pieces of apparel you could retrofit, things like that?
Same exact products, pants and shorts, are how we've launched this tech into the world. The only things that have changed are all the names on the patents and the trademarks, and then the logo on the thigh of our products, but that's it. Although there's a lot of back end work that goes into actually switching all of that over, and of course the URL and the social media handles, and messaging random people, seeing if we could bid on their Instagram handle to see if we could get it.
Georgia Grace, I promise I'm not picking on you, but I think you're the only person on stage who actually has patented technology, which is, in my experience, at least far more common in apparel industry than it is, say, in software. Wanted to ask you a little bit more about that process, and then also ask JB and Todd about intellectual property and the sort of strategies you have around that with your respective businesses.
The process of obtaining patents is a doozy, to put it lightly. The first prototypes I sewed myself. I hadn't sewn since 7th grade home economics class, so they were horrendous, but they were functional. And I built, at the time, SheFly out through a 4-week entrepreneurship class at Middlebury College in Vermont. And so I entered that class with my prototypes and ended 4 weeks later with a full business model and won my first pitch competition, which was $250. And I took it to a local seamstress and said, "Can you help me make this pretty?" And she did, and that was enough to then build a tech pack and apply for patents. And so we have design and utility patents in over 30 countries worldwide. And that is the design that goes into our pants and shorts. And then we were back-to-back winners of the Outdoor Retailer Innovation Award, which no company has ever done before. We were really excited for our legging design, which will come out next year and is compatible as a base layer or as a standalone layer with our other products. And then we're patent pending for several other designs, including anything that would go into a onesie, so overalls or ski bibs, flight suits, etc.
Todd and JB, I threw a curveball with IP, but we'll stay on that topic, and then we'll bounce back to community engagement.
Yeah, for us, IP is tricky because we're using a number of existing things in novel and new ways. So in particular, we're using high-definition LiDAR mapping of the surface of the Earth, basically. Typically, what you see and how that's applied isn't how we're applying it, and we're applying a modified algorithm that is based on another one that's used in Europe that screens out a lot of risk. So it's odd because we can copyright it, but we can't patent it because it's not different enough. And to be candid, we're being a little cagey, I guess, about how much we expose to that, because it would be easy for others. I don't want to say easy. There is an opportunity for that to be taken from us, right? But the other side of this is the engineering team has had to invent processes and technology to make this possible on your mobile device. So the file sizes of the data that we're dealing with is many, many terabytes. We've spent the entire summer rendering this data for the rest of the Western United States outside of Colorado. It's still not done. Computers have been spinning 24 hours a day, 7 days a week since April. So there's a huge challenge there, and that is actually, I think, probably where our most important IP is that there's like a legitimate obstacle to doing what we're doing because of the size of the data. So
when you pointed at the topo shading last night, I mean, that sort of unique aspect, it's interesting to start, I think, about particularly with software, developing components of the overall app and technology that can then on their own be viable business models on their own.
Yeah, initially I wasn't sure that we were going to be able to do this. When we started to dig into it, I had a realization of, okay, now I know why no one has done this yet. The front range zone was 2 terabytes of data, and we didn't know how we were going to get it down small enough to get onto a mobile device.
Just front range alone?
Front range.
Wow.
Yeah. So you kind of, you invent things along the way and figure out how to get through it. And, but that is part of our IP. That is something that we are keeping pretty guarded.
Yeah, I mean, I think IP in the vertical farming world is usually around technology. And so a lot of our competitors are focused on, building the next robot or the next machine learning or the next camera or those sorts of technology plays. Because of our social impact mission, in addition to our growing a food mission, I think if we end up having IP, our philosophy around technology limits our ability to have IP because we just want to use the best technology that's already proven so that we can operate as efficiently and effectively and with the highest yields possible. So we're actually reliant on other people's IP. What's been interesting, and I can actually connect this back to community, I think for vertical harvest, we spend a lot of time, I don't think it's patentable the way that Georgia Grace and JB can patent things, but the way we do business is pretty unique. Employing 50%, at least 50% of our workforce has disabilities. We have what we call a grow well model that has a lot of pieces of developing the individual, the community, and the company. And we actually get, not just in Jackson, but in other places, questions around, hey, could we copy that? Could we do what you're doing in our business? And I think the answer is yes. I've had the good fortune of being in a lot of different industries, and I can tell you without a doubt that if the culture and the leadership of the company is willing to do things the way we do it, and we're still figuring some of it out, the answer is yes, it is replicable and scalable in kind of how we do it. I don't know if it's patentable, but I think there's some IP there. We've even talked about, if we were to buy, let's just say a supplier, right, like a seed company or something like that, how can we make sure that our IP or the way we do business can then be implemented in that so that we're all doing it the way we believe in doing it? And the other piece of, it's not really IP, but tied to community that I just wanted to mention is, I think coming back to a mountain town, it's interesting to think about community engagement, at least for us, from 2 lenses. One, the community changes seasonally, right? So Jackson has 3 million visitors in the summer and has 10,000 year-round residents, right? So how you engage with the community in a small town can be seasonal, right? Whether it's product, et cetera. And then we have a philosophy or certainly I do, but hopefully the whole company does, which is first do no harm, right? And so we want to make sure that the way we engage with the communities we're in, not just in Jackson, but in Portland, Maine, or Detroit, right? There are farmers, we consider ourselves farmers, that are working really hard to do what they do, and we don't want to be displacing farmers, we want to be augmenting the food system. So when we show up at the local farmers market and the people's market, we don't sell product there, right? Because that is we have the good fortune of we can be on retail shelves and in restaurants year round, and for the local farmer, that is their busy, like they're dependent upon the summer or the growing season. So we encourage our employees to show up and engage in those locations with like, hey, can we help those farmers set up their booths? Can we help the local people's market put up and tear down, so that we're not doing damage to the local community unintentionally? So I think, and then the last piece of engaging with the community, I would say for us, again, to just use the summer season in Jackson as an example, it's actually a really good place to test product, to test flavors, to test packaging, to get feedback, because there's people from all over the world. Certainly all over the country, but all over the world that come there. So it's a really, if you find ways to be entrepreneurial about it, and you consider the community not just the year-round community, you can actually get a lot done and a lot of learning really quickly by leveraging that community engagement, which doesn't really lead to patents, but it does lead to product research and things like that for us.
Todd, I'm going to stay with you for a moment. Where are you getting that technology that you mentioned?
Yeah, so specific to the growing systems, right? Lights, conveyors, trays, racks, water systems.
It's worth YouTubing this whole system if you haven't, to just check out. We're talking like vertical walls of rotating lettuce and huge controlled environment rooms full of microgreens, all built into this gleaming glass cube on the side of a parking deck in Jackson Hole in downtown.
Yeah, it is worth checking out, and I can say that without arrogance because I don't have anything to do with the design. Our CEO is an architect, and they're beautiful buildings as well as functional buildings. But to answer your question, I would say 90% of the technology related to growing or the systems related to growing comes out of the Netherlands. They're the experts in this field, and so we have partnerships with those vendors, and that's where it comes from.
And then also I was going to ask about the history of the Grow Well model and a commitment to employing people with disabilities. And how did that all come about specifically with a vertical farming company? Yeah,
so again, I deserve zero credit and nor will I take any for it. So Vertical Harvest opened in 2016. The facility opened in 2016. The three women who founded the company I probably worked on it, I would guess, 5 to 10 years to get that literally off the ground. And the story is, I would say it's typical in the sense of it was a local effort, atypical in the sense that it's vertical farming in a mountain town. The current, the still CEO and one of the co-founders, Nona Yahya, has an architecture background. The town of Jackson built a parking garage that didn't take up the whole piece of land that it was built on, and so it was just kind of an unused eyesore to the community. And so three women, one, Nona Yahya, our CEO, got together with another woman, Penny McBride, who had a farming background, and then another co-founder who still works at the company, Caroline Croft-Esty, had a background and experience in supporting people with disabilities and sort of job support. And so the three of them got together and said, hey, what can we do that can feed people, because there was a farmer involved, can be architecturally appealing because there's an architect involved, and can support an underserved workforce, which is people with disabilities. In addition to Caroline's work with people with disabilities, Nona has a brother who has severe mental disabilities as well. And so the three of them got together and through an RFP process, figured out how to design it, how to build it, and then how to run it. And back to our commitment, it's not just about employing people with disabilities for us. And I would argue, there's some language around different abilities. We all have different abilities, and that's why I say our model can be employed anywhere. But specific to people with disabilities, we have employees who, it wasn't necessarily that they couldn't find a job, but the jobs they had no upward mobility or no career path, right? I mean, literally, counting screws in a hardware store or taking out the trash in a hotel. Nothing wrong with those jobs, but they just didn't have a path forward. So we've worked really hard to develop, with the use of technology and other things, How can we ensure not only that people with disabilities have jobs, but also that they have upward mobility? And lastly, that we're leveraging, some disabilities come with gifts, right? So we have really smart people that are labeled with a disability, whether it's autism or things like that, that honestly, their skill set is really good for us. They're, Johnny Feifels, who, if he's watching this, will know, right? I mean, he has a disability, but he is meticulous about microgreens. He knows every single square inch of that farm, and he is now the manager of all microgreens at Vertical Harvest, whereas he used to work at a hotel. So if that answers your question.
That's perfect. Thanks, Todd. So I wanted to move back to JB. JB, and you all mentioned that the app is not fully live yet. What does the user testing of a backcountry app to inform avalanche decision making look like? What is the beta phase of that?
Means I get to ski a lot. So we've had some alphas. We had a really high, good working product last winter. And our intention was to launch it for free last year. Insurance was an obstacle for us, in getting that secured. So it's been born of a few things. So out of Jeff training people of various degrees of experience, from mountain guides to, everyday people like us on avalanche safety, and observing what their pain points are, and I think pretty universally there's a couple of things that happen when people leave their ARI 1 class. They're terrified and they're overwhelmed by the amount of information that they have to deal with. So our product testing cycle revolved around breaking those things down into really small chunks and identifying, well, why are you terrified, right? Or what is it about the information that is overwhelming, and figuring out how to solve those individually and then bringing them back together. So, the current iteration of the app, I think, is like our 20th prototype at this point. It's been a lot of in-field testing. And my background is in UX design and user research, so this was really kind of my dream project and kind of in my wheelhouse, in the sense that, we were just out in the field testing with people, observing, asking questions, and then going back and making changes to it over and over and over and over again. The other side to that is that our whole platform is based on data, not feelings and emotions, because that is typically what get people in trouble in the backcountry, or otherwise known as the human factors. So a lot of our research and product development was built on existing research on that stuff, but then also, again, our own observations about how people make decisions in the backcountry. What are the impacts of being tired and hungry and things like that happen, or how does that impact decision making, and what can we do in the app to help people manage those risks when they are mentally and physically fatigued? Does that answer your question?
It does. I got another one, though.
Okay.
So given that there's already a framework, and I know you have to be diplomatic here, but if there is an established framework, you mentioned ARI, of safety training in the backcountry, is this meant to replace, supplement, substitute? What's been the reception of this idea from what I'll call the avalanche safety establishment?
It's complicated. It's been mixed. We are not a substitute for training. Everybody, if you're going to be in the backcountry, should be getting the proper training. Our app is built as a tool to augment that training, and is really about avalanche prevention. One of the things that we talk about a lot is, I ski with $2,000 worth of gear on me at all times that is only going to be used after the unthinkable has happened. And we want to try and solve that problem before it's happened. But that comes with disrupting the industry, right? And some of the things that we're doing are not commonly done in the way that is, avalanche safety is being taught. And and also the way that it's being forecasted. As an example, we've introduced a separate danger rating called Scary Moderate that is based on data that we've looked at from North America and Europe over the last 20 years. We're hundreds of avalanche accidents and fatalities to inform this. And it is a term that the guiding community uses amongst themselves, but it's not one that is commonly public facing. So we find that guides are really perceptive to it and are like, this is great. This is going to help keep my clients safe, where some of the kind of old guard industry is less willing to accept some of these changes. And I think it's a function of maybe being a little bit threatened, but also at the same time, change is hard. And they've been doing it the same way for 50 years, and there's not a lot of motivation to change that.
Scary moderate.
Yep. You want me to go into detail about that?
What's an example of scary moderate?
So scary moderate, in Colorado in particular, if there's any skiers in the crowd, we have a continental snowpack, which is incredibly unstable. And it's unstable because of depth or persistent slab, I think is the common layers, or an old snow problem, I think is how it's commonly referred to. The presence of that in the snowpack increases your likelihood of setting off an avalanche. So the current forecasting systems or models don't look for those signals in the noise. So our application actually is looking for references to an old snow problem, and we typically ski under scary moderate most of the season here in Colorado because that old snow problem always exists. So we're providing more conservative travel advice that is going to keep, skiers safe. The other thing we look at is what was the forecast yesterday. So for example, if it was considerable yesterday, and the forecasting agency bumps it down to moderate, that is actually a scary moderate day. The snowpack is still in transition, and it hasn't quite settled to the point to where we feel like it's actually a moderate day, whatever that means in Colorado. And we have a lot of data that supports that. So we're building all this and making these decisions based on
Erring on the side of even more conservative than, say, like a cake daily bulletin kind of a thing.
Very much so, yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We're through our preset topics. I'd like to turn it over to the audience for questions.
Thank you. So this is kind of a two-pronged question, but first, you mentioned the high net worth individuals. What has been your best avenue to get access to those people, whether it be Chamber of Commerce events, fundraising events, et cetera? And then two of you are not the sexy tech startup. How have you found the best way to approach people that you're not going to be the next 50X company when you're raising capital?
I'll go first. As far as meeting the high net worth individuals, I mean, people that know me, I have this saying, I've had more coffee, lunch, and beer than anybody in Jackson. Because I think that's how you get to know people in a small community, right? You break bread with them or have a beer with them or whatever. So I would say, my experience, at least in Jackson, is that people are really open. You just have to be willing to ask. Somebody once told me the world will rally around what it hears you want. You just have to tell the world what you want. And so I've honestly just, social events. I'm old school. I carry around business cards and I hand them out, and people are like, "You still have these things?" And then follow up. So I think follow up and follow through and then there's some great organizations. I know they exist where you guys live, but Jackson has an organization called Silicon Couloir, which is essentially a gathering place, both physical but virtual, for people that want to be involved in helping businesses, whether to Georgia Grace's point, whether it's a lifestyle business or a scalable one. And then lastly, I mean, it goes without saying, recreation, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've met in a lift line, on the gondola, on the running trail, at the golf course. I think it's an advantage, or it's a benefit of a small community, is people are really, really open to it. And at least in Jackson, I mean, honestly, like the wealthiest person is the least conspicuous person in Jackson, Wyoming. And I think, Jackson prides itself on, I mean, there is certainly glitz and glamour, don't get me wrong, but just being willing to say hello and, go to the coffee shop in the morning, and there's no secret. It's just, the willingness to ask. I'll let you answer the 50X question.
Well, first, to the first question about high net worth individuals, I don't think there's one way to do it. I think you got to do all the ways. When I think about the things that I've done, it's like chase a Walton down by bike in Bentonville, show up at a film festival and hear someone talking about writing a check for a movie and then ask if they want to write a check to me instead. Talked to people on ski lifts, like just talked about it nonstop, basically. I think, like most things, all it takes is one. Once you find your first investor, the rest come because they also know people. So I guess that would be my all over the place advice for that one. I'd also say pitch competitions. That's like how I bootstrapped the first 3 years of this company, just on pitch competition wins and one crowdfunding campaign. And that was really helpful for visibility. Some of those pitch competitions we won, some we didn't, but there was usually someone in the audience who was interested in writing a check. To the second question about not being a sexy tech startup, I pretend that we are, or I try to sell us as one, in the sense that typical retail apparel brands only have so much growth they can do because cash flow is constantly tied to inventory. The strategy behind investing in IP so early on, I was working like 4 jobs a semester in college to pay the early legal fees and my tuition and my loans and everything else, was that I knew that that was going to be the only, like that's ultimately where the majority revenue stream was going to come from being able to have passive revenue off of royalties instead of having to do everything in-house. So that's the talking point that I play up and have played up since before we even had our own product in-house. But if you don't have something like that, I think that what's exciting about product-based companies is how tangible your thing is. Like so many of our investors love us because they wear our products around and talk about them constantly, and they're excited about it, and you can touch it and feel it and see the actual difference that it's making. And tech startups do that too, but I think that's something that's unique about not tech startups and something to emphasize because it is pretty special. You can see exactly like what your money is going towards.
Thank you, perfect. And then JB, if you need a tester, I'll volunteer.
Yeah, I want to add to what Todd and Georgia Grace said in that it's been a kind of a mixed bag for Jeff and I. We initially, kind of how we got our start into all this is Jeff found out about the ICE Lab in Gunnison. We went through that, and that gave us some initial exposure to some individuals in the Gunnison Valley that might be interested in investing that ultimately didn't pan out because all those individuals had invested in brick and mortar things, and they didn't understand technology. That kind of put us back to square one, but really I think where we've gained our momentum is Jeff leveraging his relationships with the folks at the Forecasting Center, at Irwin Guides, and some of those different individuals that he has strong relationships with that have gotten us into speaking at Avalanche Awareness Night in Crested Butte, for example. And when you start to get some of that exposure, people kind of come out of the woodwork a little bit. But Jeff has daily board meetings in the wintertime where he takes people out skiing and bends their ear for 3 hours, or they're trapped on the skin track with him. And we've actually gotten connected to a lot of really helpful and important individuals through that. So, to Todd's point, like, you kind of have to just get out there and talk to people and, see if they can offer up a name, and then you immediately go and talk to that person, and you just keep chasing it down. And there's a little bit of humility with it. Jeff and I hate asking for money in this process of fundraising. So there's been a learning curve there as well.
One other piece of advice, I know we're at the end here, that I got early on was if you're looking for money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. And I used to think that, I actually have said on podcasts, like, that's the worst piece of advice I've ever been given. Like, you should just ask for exactly what you want. But I will say now at this stage, that has become true. I'll approach someone for one thing, and then it turns out they actually can't do that, but they do want to invest. So I don't know, maybe that's a useful tip.
Same here. That's how it's
I was
worked for
literally
us.
about to say that. Before I was in this space, I spent a lot of time in the nonprofit world raising money. I mean, it was donated money, and that is the saying. Ask for advice and you'll get the money. Yeah, exactly.
All right, we might have time for one last quick question if there are any from the audience. Yes.
I know a lot of people kind of look at like the growth of mountain communities as being an issue, but I would imagine, for you all in terms of local talent, and buyers and all of that, like it could actually be, a big plus. Is that the case? Like, living where you are, do you sort of look forward to the impending growth? I think of someone like Bozeman, for instance, that's really blown up. And then the second part of that is, how do you fill those roles that maybe you can't with local talent? Are those people coming to you and saying, "Hey, you have an awesome company. I don't live in that mountain town, but I want to get involved," or is it mainly local and you just sort of work with what you have and then grow?
To your first question, I mean, there are those who don't want any change in any community, right? I'm certainly not one of those. I think it's about smart growth, not no growth, for sure. And then communities like Bozeman and certainly help us out. We have right now about 54 employees, and we have employees in 11 states. So to answer your question, I would say of the out-of-state employees, probably 60% of them found us. Now we were looking for talent, but there was definitely an inbound there, and that, again, running it doesn't matter the size, running a company from a small town with remote employees, that's a whole nother topic for discussion, right? I mean, when we have people all over the country in different time zones and Zooms and all that stuff. So I guess the short answer to your question is yes, growth helps us, and yes, we have to find talent all over the place. Some of that, I mean, you can't work remotely if you're a farmer, right? So some of our jobs have to be in the farm, and some of them are more amenable to remote, and we're trying to leverage all of the above to make this work.
Yeah, growth has helped us as well. And what I've found living in a mountain town is that when one of us gets major press, it helps all of us. So like CNN just reviewed us, which was huge. And that also meant that CNN then looked into other local small businesses in my mountain town. So having like Gunnison on that piece of press, I think is huge for everyone. And then in terms of finding talent, asking people if they know people. We do a monthly newsletter to all of our mentors or fans or people who have helped out in some way and are really invested, and we do 3 asks at the end of each monthly newsletter that's like, here's what we're looking for right now, and that's how we found a lot of help that we couldn't source locally.
Yeah, it's been mixed for us. The engineering team are people that I've worked with in the past in my technology consulting career that I actively recruited them. But we've also received a lot of inquiry from folks that have, seen a couple of articles written about us that have backgrounds in some of the technologies that we're using, and we're actively working with one of those individuals that reached out and said, "Hey, this is awesome. I do GIS. Can I help you?" But he's in Leadville. He's not anywhere near where all this other stuff is. So we have a really distributed workforce for Aspect.
All right. Well, we have run over time a little bit, but we really appreciate everyone from coming to join this session. Thanks very much to our panelists, and everyone enjoy the rest of the day.